This is the truth of the Imperium. This is a story of the Age of Darkness. It is a tale of the Age of Darkness, when Horus turned against the Emperor and forever shattered the Imperium. It was a time of betrayal and heroism, which shaped our Pale Age in the most bloody manner, dooming us to a grim future where there is only war. In the grip of this merciless era, brother turned against brother, and the Emperor's legions fought among themselves until the number of dead surpassed the living. Countless worlds were destroyed, and their populations slaughtered to satisfy the ambitions of Horus, while the Imperium itself turned into desolate ruins of its former grandeur. Yet we gaze with envy at the bitter glory of that era, for although it was a time of immense tragedies and hardships, those who walked that bloody path trod the road of the gods. None among the living witnessed that epoch. It has wholly turned into legend, and even the greatest libraries of Terra and Ophelia hold only fragments of the truth about it. To those who lived in the shadow of the tragedy of this conflict, it must have seemed that the Imperium could never recover from such reckless hatred. Nevertheless, the wheel of history always turns forward, and the miseries and glories that accompany her always recur in equal measure. Now, in these dire times, the tale of the rise and fall of mankind is as important to us as it was in those dark years. Everyone knows the bitter end that will befall this story, and yet within this narrative lies the power that the heroes of past ages once possessed. This is the truth of the Imperium. This is the story of the Horus heresy. Years of darkness and blood. It is said that chronicles of wars are written only by those who have tasted victory, and perhaps today the truth will die with you. This time I call upon you to fight not for triumph or glory, but to battle with hearts filled with rage and revenge, and to die with the solace of the knowing that the chronicle of our darkest hour will never be written. Unauthorized Vox recording intercept during the fall of Dranima, the fallen empire. In the years following the War Master's betrayal, the Imperium was cast down from the heights of its golden age and plunged under the sway of cataclysm. The treachery of Horus Lupercal allowed the bitter seeds of rebellion and decay, sown over 2 centuries of the Great Crusade, to take root and grow twisted, crooked branches that plunged the land into darkness. Where once sober reason and order reigned, despair and chaos now held sway. In the end, all that was once valued and cherished became fuel for the war machine. Those who swore fealty to Horus shed all pretense of nobility and revealed themselves as shameless, depraved individuals consumed by perverse ambitions. What had not turned to ruins and ash beneath the feet of the greatest armies ever assembled became prey for the denizens of the Immaterium, beckoning through the tears in the fabric of reality, the unholy and corrupted servants. Even as countless legions of traitors descended upon the solar system to seize Terra itself, a war of unprecedented scale continued to rage among the stars. Deeds that might otherwise have entered the annals of history as true legends were not recorded even as fleeting notes. Mighty heroes perished only to be buried under heaps of nameless dead. Now all those who kept memories of them have been killed, so the memory of the fallen was lost due to the war that consumed everything and everyone. Such were the scales of the mournful final years of the Horus heresy. Battles were fought not for strategic gain or tactical advantage, but rather to sate the thirst for death. The blood of billions was spilled merely to ease the murder of billions more. After the war, entire worlds turned into crypts. The bones of once thriving bastions of the Imperium decayed on the blackened, desecrated soil. It seemed as though the dim light of the human race was on the verge of extinguishing. Everything once held sacred suddenly lost its value. The Great Crusade seemed futile, for at the end awaited death alone for each and every one. However, despite all of this, those who remained loyal to the Emperor continued to fight tirelessly amidst darkness and sorrow against those who turned from him. With no hope for victory or the return of lost honor, they fought not for glory or conquests as once before, but driven to the brink of sanity, they battled for vengeance. Striving to survive, if only to fight another day, they stood shoulder to shoulder, forever changed, faded shadows of whom they once were, and they swore new oaths. They vowed to fight eternally, for they knew that in the darkness of the future there is only war. Battles in the years of darkness and blood, from the 8th to the 11th year of the 31st millennium, the rebelliousness of Baal. Cut off from the main forces of their legion that had departed for the Cygnus cluster, several companies of the Blood Angels remained on Baal, the homeworld of their Primarch, and found themselves under siege by traitors, including the forces of the sons of Horus, the Emperor's children, and Mechanicum followers loyal to the Warmaster. Doubts began to grow among the Blood Angels, their morale waned, and a dark shroud seemed to descend upon the Legion. Many were convinced that the distant Sanguinius had fallen. Confidence in this outcome grew after contingents of Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard legions, fleeing after the massacre on Istvan V, arrived on Baal, for they brought news of the death of Ferrus Manus and the unknown fate of Vulcan. United in their grief, the Loyalist legions organize into functional, mixed combat squads and collectively resist the unending attacks of traitors throughout the heresy. On 2 occasions, large-scale invasions by the renegades end in failure when the resolute and united defenders of Baal repel the treacherous advances. Between these assaults, guerrilla warfare rages across the Baal system. Loyalists execute raids to deliver sabotage strikes against the besieging fleets. Thus, the once-proud sons of faithful Primarchs confront the conquerors in a series of hit-and-fade maneuvers, aiming to bleed the enemy through hit-and-run tactics. The destruction of Davin, the 11th year of the 31st millennium. After the disbandment of the Imperium Secundus, Sanguinius, the Lion, and Guilliman attempt to break through the ruin storm and join the Emperor's forces on Terra. Surrounded by the spawn of the warp in the Immaterium, they emerge into real space in the Davin system, discovering a world under the warped influence of dark powers. All 3 Primarchs initiate a massive planetary landing, facing demonic manifestations both on the surface of the world and in its orbit. In a bid to stop the demon invasion, the Primarchs obliterate Davin with orbital bombardment, and with the death of the planet, a path through the ruined storm opens. The reaving of the Shibana reaches, the 11th year of the 31st millennium. After the return of the vengeful Blood Angels from the 106th Expeditionary Fleet, and their short yet brutal campaign of retribution against the Word-Bearers' enclaves in the Galactic West, the remnants of the original companies of the 9th, united with a contingent of Iron Hands, launch attacks on the traitor strongholds in a series of devastating raids. Beyond the Shibana reaches, both Loyalist legions unleash their wrath upon the outposts of the Sons of Horus. As both the 9th and 10th legions are wounded by betrayal, their combined fury knows no bounds. They mercilessly exterminate each and every one of the traitorous sons of the Warmaster, sparing none who swore loyalty to him. Following the initiation of these campaigns, communication between the former elements of the 106th Expeditionary and their Iron Hands allies is severed, and their exact whereabouts become unknown. Fragments of records found aboard the long-abandoned cruiser of the Auxilia Fleet Forces, Immaculata, contain the last known information about these troops present in the subsector, indicating that they likely pursued the fleeing traitor forces beyond the boundaries of Imperial space. Embers in the darkness. From the 12th to the 13th year of the 31st millennium, the blockade of Inwit by traitor forces turns into a prolonged siege, and the forces loyal to the Warmaster fortify themselves on the planet's surface in addition to the growing cordon around the entire system, forcing the Imperial Fists and their auxilia allies to battle in increasingly isolated pockets of resistance across numerous worlds throughout the cluster. Loyalists trapped within these cauldrons rely on meagre ammunition supplies and reinforcements, as well as pilots from the Divisio Aeronautica who undertake thousands of perilous combat sorties. Among the forces caught in the thick of the action are detachments of the Salamanders, specially equipped for close-quarters combat near the icy hives and residential blocks of Inwit. Operating in coordination with the Imperial Fists, already entrenched at defensive lines, the Sons of Vulcan conduct guerrilla raids on traitor positions across each world of the cluster. laying deadly traps for enemy troops, destabilizing their supply lines, and sabotaging the operational capability of their war machines. After one such raid, where the salamanders managed to destroy 2 Warhound-class Titans and inflict critical damage on a Reaver during maintenance and resupply, the morale among loyalists is significantly bolstered. Despite heavy losses from such risky undertakings, the relatively small force manages to thwart the enemy's plans at a time when a conventional attack is unfeasible. And this factor, as many believe, plays a crucial role in enabling Inuit to hold out until the blockade is eventually lifted. Iron Shackles. The 12th year of the 31st millennium. After the 4th Legion's departure from Talon, Perturabo devises a program of mass induction to replenish and strengthen the human resources of his legion, as well as to make up for the enormous losses suffered by the 4th following the onset of Horus heresy. Throughout the galaxy, the Iron Warriors heed the command and begin to enact the will of their Primarch, indiscriminately enslaving the human populations of entire worlds and leaving their native planets stripped and empty. A massive concentration of Iron Warriors moves through the entire segmentum Tempestus, methodically extracting every possible resource from several systems. Some worlds, like Gefferman 12, capitulate voluntarily, while others, such as Haddon, are taken by force. Burning of Adilitar. The 12th year of the 31st millennium. Following their flight from Chemos after its devastation by the Dark Angels, scattered detachments of the Emperor's children disperse throughout the region known as the Pale Stars, where they regroup and establish their new dominion. In due course, the expansion of the latter draws the attention of the Salamander's garrison on Nocturne, who mobilize in a bid to counter the growing forces of traitors. The 18th Legion commences a systematic cleansing campaign, scorching each planet occupied by the disgraced Legion of Fulgrim, reducing to ashes every legionary of the 3rd. The aggressive campaign of the Nocturne progeny reaches the Adilitar system, whose central planet is chosen by the 3rd Legion as the heart of their new kingdom, and the cornerstone around which they could establish control over the entire subsector. Across the barren expanse of the surface of Adilitar, the Emperor's children erected a formidable defense and fortified the orbital sphere with an interconnected network of satellite stations controlled by an ancient artificial intelligence. Unable to execute effective orbital strikes due to the complex defensive network protecting the traitor's world, the Salamanders initiate boarding operations, aiming to sabotage the functionality of the enemy's weapons and to gain the capability to bring their ships within effective firing range. For several weeks, control over the relay nodes of the defensive network is temporarily wrested from the hands of the Emperor's children before the automated systems reroute and restore the network. These actions afford the Salamanders only fleeting opportunities to unleash the might of their formidable weaponry on individual sectors of the planet and to deploy additional reinforcements to the areas of escalating combat on the surface. Astartes of the 3rd Legion defending Adilitar successfully exploit the Salamanders' inability to throw superior forces into the fray, and only after several months of ferocious, relentless battles are they finally driven from their citadel, allowing the forces of the 18th Legion to join their brothers in clearing the remaining part of the region. Heralds of Deceit, the 12th year of the 31st millennium. During the campaign to annihilate the Xenos Empire, known as the Waral 80th, at the concluding phase of the Great Crusade, the 3,686th Expeditionary Fleet, primarily composed of a company of pathfinders from the 5th Legion supported by cohorts of the Solar Auxilia, was declared lost due to prolonged absence of communication with larger Imperial formations. However, at the beginning of the 12th year of the 31st millennium, remnants of the 3,686th emerge from the warp in the region beyond the Ghoul stars, and immediately intercept fragmentary messages identified as distress signals from multiple locations across the segmentum. After charting a course to the nearest source of these signals, the fleet's flagship Lux Majestas takes aboard several surviving legionaries of the 20th Legion, unaware of the survivors' potential allegiance to Horus. Instead of attacking the White Scars and their allies, several Space Marines of the Alpha Legion detail in interrogations the events of the heresy, consistent with what was previously known to the commander of the 3686th Fleet, asserting that their allegiance, unlike much of their legion, is sworn to the Emperor. Upon being horrified by this shocking information, yet having little reason to doubt the credibility of what they are told, the 3686th Fleet converges and plunges into the warp once more, intending to join the Imperial forces that are purportedly organizing a muster in a system within the Alaxus Nebula. Fate of Barbarus. The year 13 of the 31st millennium. When the shadow of the approaching Loyalist fleet falls upon Barbarus, the integrity of the Death Guard garrison left on the planet's surface after Mortarian's departure is jeopardized. Divisions within the ranks of the officer corps spill over into open schism as the garrison company commanders differ in opinion regarding how the 14th should respond to the imminent devastating assault by the Lion, Russ, and their combined armies. Without the presence of their own Primarch, the viability of Barbarus's defense is openly questioned, with some calling for a full-scale retreat in hopes that the planet itself might be spared from destruction. Others insist on defiance, despite the futility and inevitability of the outcome of such actions. In the absence of supreme authority, rising tensions soon escalate into armed clashes, culminating in the anti-aircraft fire and destruction of their renegade brethren by the 84th Garrison Company of Barbarus, who had attempted to leave the planet with supplies of toxic cultures, chemical profiles and gene seed with the apparent intention of replicating their homeworld elsewhere in the galaxy. Halting of Vraman muster, the year 13 of the 31st millennium. Ahead of the main forces of the Loyalist Crusade fleet pushing a path of destruction through the sectors of the galactic south, a strike force of the Raven Guard strikes the Vramon system. Preliminary attacks revealed that the local ruling castes had pledged allegiance to Horus without the knowledge of the Imperium and had belatedly formed significant militia forces in the form of vast regiments of conscripts recruited from the continent-spanning populations. As the vast hive manufactorums of Raman III shift to the production of munitions and arms, and its starports shelter numerous cargo-laden void tugs, the assembled forces are ready to leave the system and join the War Master's campaign. Lacking sufficient troops for direct confrontation, and fearing that even the skillful elimination of key leaders would not break the resolve of the traitorous forces, the 19th Legion executes a swift deployment utilizing shadows and subterfuge to infiltrate the primary docking spires at key positions, executing a series of coordinated strikes to incapacitate the largest of the starships. The Raven Guard gained the opportunity to significantly limit the mobilization capability of the recently assembled forces, effectively forcing a considerably large army to be stuck within its own system, with no choice but to await the swift arrival of the Lion's wrath. Descent into Madness, the 13th year of the 31st millennium. Several Loyalist Imperial outposts, located to the southwest of the galactic core, recorded reports of sporadic attacks by bands of terrifying mutated creatures, beasts, and mutilated humanoids clad in defiled power armor, bearing barely recognizable insignia of the Third Legion. Initially, it was presumed that aberrant cults or some unknown xenoforms were responsible for these incidents, imitating the Emperor's children or acting on orders from their agents, since these attacks lacked the overwhelming force and coordination characteristic of genuine legionaries, and the forces conducting them appeared disorganized or afflicted by malaise. Over the course of several months, the attacks escalated from relatively easily repelled raids to far more dangerous invasions, until eventually the outposts on the perimeter of several local clusters ceased transmitting identification codes and were deemed to be captured or destroyed. The Veil Torn. The 14th year of the 31st millennium. As the Solar War rages, the Word-Bearers and the Thousand Sons, led by Ahriman himself, overcame the automated defenses of a comet converted into the Shrine of Unity. The eccentric orbit of this crypt created by the Emperor for the bones of millions who perished during the Unification Wars, is such that it would pass near Terra once every 1,000 years, and the traitor's attack coincided precisely with its perigee. To complete the ritual begun years ago by the legion once known as the Imperial Heralds, the sorcerers of the 15th carried out human sacrifices, opening a warp rift visible from the surface of Terra and the Moon, through which a grand armada of Horus's followers passes, including the flagship of Angron the Conqueror, Fulgrim's Pride of the Emperor, and the Vengeful Spirit itself. The last years of the Horus heresy, wars in the shadows. The events occurring in proximity to the Segmentum Solar during Horus's campaign on Terra would become some of the most significant and legendary battles ever known to the Imperium, eclipsing all other human historical conflicts. Rogel Dawn, Primarch of the 7th Legion and Praetorian of Terra, fortified his defences in anticipation of the inevitable arrival of the treacherous hordes, while the Emperor waged his own hidden war within the Webway, an extra-dimensional realm existing between reality and the world of the Immaterium. The Loyalist forces were mobilized to defend the realm of humanity, from the cordon wall of the Imperial Palace itself to the distant cold moons of Pluto. The hordes of traitors, in turn, left behind only ruins as they gathered and prepared to attack the most fortified bastion in the entire galaxy, the solar system. However, the cradle of humanity was by no means the only place where battles raged in the final years of the heresy. Not all remnants of the expeditionary fleets, garrison forces and combat detachments that still remained scattered across the farthest corners of the galaxy chose to embark on the long journey to Terra. Many heeded Dawn's call, but couldn't break through the reinforced blockade of the rebels, or were too few in numbers to join the decisive battle on the Emperor's side. The united traitorous forces of the Emperor's children, Death Guard, Iron Warriors, World Eaters and the Thousand Suns gathered in the Inwit cluster, effectively trapping the loyal Imperial fists on the surface of their own homeworld. It is worth noting that the resources expended on preventing the 7th Legion from reinforcing Terra were considered worthwhile by the traitors, if it reduced the number of guns arrayed upon the ramparts of the Imperial Palace even to the slightest extent. Elsewhere, on the distant world of Drassen, contingents of Iron Hands and Iron Warriors maintained an alliance, paying little heed to the events of the heresy. In the 10th year of the 31st millennium, this peace was shattered by the arrival of warships from the Raven Guard and the Alpha Legion, leading to open confrontation. The War of the Legions quickly engulfed the entire planet, as both sides faced anew the horror of betrayal. The entire hive city of Drassen and billions of its inhabitants perished within a few brief hours, when the colossal structure broke free from its gravitational bonds and crashed onto the planet's surface. Some of the warring factions found themselves drawn into conflicts they themselves instigated, campaigns of extermination against those they once called cousins, or wars of attrition fueled by bitterness and hatred. The grand strategic objectives of many such conflicts were insignificant compared to the opportunity they provided to exact a bloody toll from those who had become sworn enemies. The spirit of noble conquests and grand expansion that prevailed during the Great Crusade was given scant attention, replaced by the singular measure of victory, the complete annihilation of the enemy and any fortress they occupied. The Forican Campaign. A loyalist fleet composed of reconstituted fragments of the Salamanders and Iron Hands battle companies arrived in the Forican system in the 13th year of the 31st millennium, abandoning all hope of breaking through the blockade surrounding Terra and bringing war with them. The Forican system had been held by the garrison of the 4th Legion since the final days of the Great Crusade, although Perturabo's legion was not brought there merely to enslave the local population or to establish a fortified operational base at a strategically significant position in the Segmentum. Instead, the Iron Warriors arrived to guard the vast Prometheum reserves extracted from beneath the sands of the sprawling expanses of Forican's landmass. At the end of the Great Crusade and during the Horus heresy, the production from the extensive processing plants of Forican III was distributed across all the fleets of the traitors, and its contribution to the campaign on Terra was acknowledged by the War Master himself. In the early days, shortly after Horus turned against the Imperium, the planet served as a bustling transit point for his war fleets, and the size of the garrison forces grew exponentially, while the orbital docking platforms of Forican were expanded to accommodate more ships and fortified with a significant number of defensive batteries. The native tribes roamed the barren continents, living in swiftly erected dome-shaped dwellings connected by walkways and bridges elevated high above the desert sands on stilts. The main settlements around the refineries were populated by masses of workers who were effectively enslaved by the Iron Warriors. Several billion souls languished there, packed into rusted frontieres standard template construction hubs stacked in honeycomb structures that stretched for kilometers and beyond the line of sight. Entire generations lived and died, knowing no fate other than the harsh labor in the stifling Prometheum drilling rigs. However, the period of intense activity within Forican proved to be short-lived, as the traitor forces were redirected into the solar system, looting necessary resources from all worlds conquered in their path, resulting in Forican 3 losing its usefulness. Although the Iron Warriors were never officially ordered to abandon their watch over the Forican system, the shift in focus led some of the Fourth's more impulsive commanders to go AWOL with their companies to join the frontline battles. Consequently, only the most resolute and determined commanders of the Iron Warriors remained on the planet, choosing to maintain dominion over the system, if only to deprive the Loyalist forces of its remaining resources. Learning of the opportunity to strike at the traitor's citadel on Forican 3, considering the reduction of the Garrison forces now heading straight into the solar system, the Loyalist fleet launched an attack, its commanders eager to gain control over the system's resources themselves. The vanguard elements of the fleet passed through the fiery arches of the orbital defenses surrounding the planet, the majority of the ships operating under automated protocols due to a shortage of capable crews. Having breached the inner cordon of the defensive network, the combined strike forces of the Salamanders and the Iron Hands were able to land on the surface and establish a beachhead on the vast barren plains of the northeastern quadrant of Forican 3. Initially, they encountered only minor resistance. The Loyalists regrouped into mechanized formations and dispersed away from their primary landing sites, methodically sweeping sector by sector. The signal of the first serious actions by the traitors on the surface of Forican was the flickering thermal signatures appearing on the long-range augers of the loyal forces observing beyond the horizon. The trunk-pumping apparatuses of thousands of Prometheum refineries were set ablaze on the orders of the Iron Warriors. Fuel within them would have lasted for decades. Thick clouds of oily soot rose into the upper layers of the atmosphere, then, condensing, descended back as rain of oily sludge. With this destructive act, Perturabo's legion intended to create a polluted hell through which the Loyalist forces would inevitably have to pass if they desired to engage the planetary garrison in battle. Regardless of the Loyalist forces' direction of advancement, they invariably faced determined resistance from the Iron Warriors, who spent all their time in garrison duty honing combat strategies, perfecting defences and maintaining constant vigilance, despite the apparent redundancy of such measures in the context of a distant war. However, all of the above perfectly matched the vengeful fury burning in the hearts of the Iron Hands and the Sons of Vulcan, as both legions had been shattered and broken on Istvan V. But now they joined their wrath and resolved to exact vengeance on their sworn enemies at any cost. Armoured wedges confronted each other on the vast desert plains, clashing along a front hundreds of kilometres wide, leaving among the dunes the blackened and charred hulks of thousands of armoured units. Fierce battles engulfed the densely built workers' settlements. The intersections of narrow streets between residential quarters turned into deadly traps as sniper units and sharpshooters picked off anyone brave or foolish enough to attempt crossing the open ground. In the confusion following Horus's defeat, the fate of the Forican system was forgotten, and whichever side emerged victorious in the confrontation on this desert world, the survivors appeared to be so few that there are no notable records of them. No banner of loyalty to any faction soared above this land, and by the time the last of the local refineries' smokestacks had burned out, All that remained on the surface were the charred wrecks of countless war machines and the mortal remains of thousands of warriors, whose bones are now gnawed by the indifferent winds of the desert. The assault of the Asteronia. Looking back, the scholars of the Imperium analysed the attack of the combined fleet of the Salamanders and the Iron Hands on Forican III, classifying it at best as probabilitas mortis. However, during the Age of Darkness, such actions were common occurrences, for during the Wars of the Legions, conditions often arose that demanded self-sacrifice. The success of the breakthrough was facilitated by the involvement of the venerable battle barge Asteronia, a massive vessel of ancient origin, which travelled among the stars even before the unification. Captured by the Iron Hands Legion, this enormous spaceship had been upgraded with experimental reactor engines, capable of powering its own propulsion system with sufficient force for the titanic ship to traverse the void at speeds comparable to the smaller contemporary ships escorting it. The first indication of the invasion noticed by the Iron Warriors were the long-range auger signals aboard the orbital defence platforms of the Forican system. The approach of the Loyalists' attacking fleet was confirmed when their ships circumvented Quarter, the largest of Forican III's moons. Leaving the system's twin suns behind them, the commanders of the Loyalist flotilla were fully aware that their forces lacked the firepower to combat the planet's surrounding guns. So their only course of action was the swiftest possible traversal of the fire lines and the execution of a planetary landing of ground troops. Ahead of the Loyalists' attacking vanguard, flying directly toward Forican III's low orbit, moved the Asteronia. Behind it, shielded by its mighty hull and activated shields, followed the rest of the fleet. The guns of the Iron Warriors tracked several signatures of the approaching Loyalists, but they were denied the opportunity to fire upon the vulnerable ships, sheltered in the shadow of the ancient behemoth leading the attack. The desperate artillerymen of the 4th Legion unleashed salvo after salvo at the Asteronia as the vessel advanced. Layers of its thick, ablative armour were scattered across space with each hit from the energy discharges and the impact of explosive warheads. The Asteronia, crippled by enemy fire and barely functional, nevertheless continued to fulfill the role of a battering ram and shield. After the ancient ship reached the orbit of Forican III, its landing craft traversed the fire fields of the defensive batteries and emerged from the wake of the battle barge, initiating a planetary landing. Having contributed to the operation's success, the surviving crew of the Asteronia failed to alter the ship's course sufficiently to follow a viable corridor for evacuation and avoid the outer layers of the planetary atmosphere. The battle barge sustained severe damage, which greatly weakened it and cast it back into the void, entirely deprived of critically important system functions. The vaults of Vzdell. Throughout the galaxy, legions forged a path of destruction among the stars, and their commanders submitted to no higher authority, unrestrained in their wrath. Primarch Leman Russ and his space wolves were unaware of the secrets concealed by the planet Vzdell Secundus. They did not arrive to plunder the numerous caches of weaponry stored there, but sought to satiate their own anger, fury and desire to destroy their treacherous brethren. Little was known about the value of this arsenal world, except that it belonged to the 20th Legion, and it is currently widely believed that the concentration of supplies and weaponry on its surface, regardless of their ownership, was a component of one of the many complex ruses devised by Alfarius himself. As a result, Vzdell Secundus lacked apparent orbital defences that would mark it as a military target, and additionally, the world was situated at some distance from frequently travelled routes, a nondescript and harmless backwater amid a galaxy torn by devastation and turmoil. As the Space Wolves fleet converged in the system, the Alpha Legion and the allied cohorts of the Securan Janissaries made no effort to resist or oppose the newcomers, which enraged Leman Russ. The Wolf King perceived such a move by the enemy as an inability to acknowledge his authority and stature. A direct address from the Primarch himself was transmitted via voxcasters to each of the ships under his command. He demanded a meeting with the highest-ranking warlord of the Alpha Legion on the planet, but the only response was silence. The audacious force of the Alpha Legion, which held Vzdell under its protectorate with the support of a large cohort of the Solar Auxilia, left Russ's message unanswered and instead opened fire on his fleet's ships as they formed into an attack formation. Across Vzdell Secundus, the 6th Legion, engulfed in bestial fury, attacked all they encountered in their path. The Securan Janissaries paid the blood price the most, their numbers meaning little in the face of Russ's and his legion's ferocity of assault. Elusive, as was their custom, the contingent of the Alpha Legion refused to engage the enemy in a decisive confrontation, preferring instead to strike and vanish, forcing the Space Wolves to expend energy, slaughtering a vast number of auxilia soldiers. The Wolves offered no mortal quarter or chance to surrender. Indeed, none of the soldiers even attempted to appeal for mercy from the enemy. The chronicles of battles that raged within the vast repositories of Vzdell, including the picked recordings from the helmets of the warriors of the 6th Legion, contain an alarmingly low number of confirmed kills of enemies from the 20th. And this fact is corroborated by the strangely small number of slain and wounded after such massive combat operations. Even more frightening was what was discovered in the underground caches beneath the expansive warehouses of Vzdell, many of which had been destroyed during the raging skirmishes. When Vzdell finally fell to the Space Wolves' invasion, and the tech marines of the 6th Legion managed to decrypt the codes to the massive explosion-proof doors leading to the subterranean caches, they discovered endless rows of legionary battle armor of various designs, some of which were recognized as standard patterns, while others appeared utterly alien and unfamiliar, yet bore the heraldry and iconography of each of the legions. Marked with winged swords, the coal-black armor dating back to the very early days of the Great Crusade numbered in the thousands, while smooth scarlet suits of Type 6, adorned with gold filigree around each ocular lens, were counted in the hundreds. In other locales, the Wolves encountered segmented suits with large, hemispherical ivory-coloured pauldrons decorated with the symbol of a crescent moon, as well as armour painted in hues unrecognisable by any known legions, bearing symbols of unknown origin and meaning. The end of hope. These battles, like so many others, serve as a vivid embodiment of the Horus heresy in the latter years of the conflict. A veil of vengeance, spite and hatred spread across the galaxy like an oil slick. Legions of once proud warriors surrendered to their baser instincts, becoming possessed killers, fixated on finishing off their enemies and erasing any traces of their existence. Despite the all-encompassing nature of Horus's objectives, those who joined his rebellion were now fragmented by infighting, the pursuit of individual goals to satisfy their own desires, and the creation of small empires in the shadow of universal devastation. Although the traitors achieved much since the War Master raised the banner of revolt against the Emperor, much along the way has been lost. While all eyes were focused on the traitors' march through the solar system, one fleet detached from the main forces of Horus's armada charted its own course in an attempt to wrest its homeworld, Cthonia, from the clutches of the Imperial Fist's garrison, which had held it for nearly a decade. Unlike the invasion of Terra, the cornerstone of Horus's insane war against the Imperium, during the siege of Cathonia, the 16th sought to reclaim what, in their legionaries' view, rightfully belonged to them, their homeworld and the honour of their legion. This conflict became a resurgence of old grievances and the continuation of personal wars, a bloodshed without strategic aims and a war threatening to last eternally. Wars are won by those wise enough to cast aside vanity and pride, but legends are forged only by those brave enough to embrace the vicissitudes of fate. Leman Russ, Primarch of the Space Wolves. In the eye of the storm. The last cataclysmic years of the Horus heresy are rife with desperate battles to the death and fierce massacres. Death and destruction were inescapable, for across the whole of the Imperium, all other war aims apart from mutual hatred had simply vanished. Now, the armies sought only to slake their thirst for vengeance and blood, thinking neither of victory nor any hope for the future, obsessed with the sole necessity to overthrow old enemies once and for all, thus putting an end to ancient enmity. Amidst all this madness, the siege of Cthonia stands as the true embodiment of needless sacrifices, forgotten heroism, and relentless hatred. Here, in this ravaged world that had formed the War Master and his legion, a world ignored for nearly 7 years of fierce enmity, all the hatred from the final years of the Horus heresy would erupt forth. Even as the hordes of Lupercal breached the gates of eternity on Terra and stormed the Emperor's palace, the Imperial fists on Cathonia continued to fight to the last, and even when Horus himself succumbed to the dark allure of omnipotence in the skies above Terra, the sons of Horus on Cathonia strove to erase the shame of losing their homeworld. In the years that followed, these futile feats would be forgotten, overshadowed by the events of the final apocalyptic battle for Terra, and those for whom these small wars would be considered the final epitaph would become mere footnotes in history, subjects of debate for uncertain scholars. However, despite all the irony in how this conflict was forged, its annals still hold much that deserves praise, as well as extensive, intriguing information about the nature of the Great Heresy and the warriors who waged this most mournful of all wars. To truly comprehend the events of the Siege of Cthonia and their significance to the broader conflict that was the Horus heresy, one must first study the relevant time and context of the happenings. The fact is, this was not an isolated battle, but the inevitable culmination of a chain of events that began long before their bloody conclusion. As with the Horus heresy in its entirety, the final throes of war on Cathonia stood as the culmination of decades of envy, rivalry, and misfortune. However, in those years, the dark interplay of grievances and sorrows often went unnoticed. The surviving records of the Age of Darkness unveil a path leading to the inevitable end of this tale, a path of regrets and unfulfilled dreams, bringing us to one of the last and most iconic forgotten battles of the Horus heresy. This is the story of the Siege of Cthonia, the fall of Terra. In most accounts of the final years of the Horus heresy, the Siege of Cthonia goes unmentioned for one simple reason: the fall of Terra. This singular battle, Horus's last desperate gambit, and his final confrontation with his father and creator, eclipses virtually all other events, no matter the significance we might assign them. Thus, we shall briefly return to this most epic of battles, so it can be set aside until the conclusion of this treatise and properly examined in a separate volume. By the 10th year of the 31st millennium, the Sol system itself had become the target of traitor raids and destructive assaults, though all these minor incursions were quickly repelled by its defenders. Only in the 13th year of the 31st millennium would the full-scale invasion of the traitorous host into the Sol system prove so grand that Dawn and his besieged forces could do little more than delay its advance towards Terra. This invasion would unfold simultaneously as the sons of Horus commenced their assault on Cathonia, with Horus's landing on Terra coinciding with his legion's final attack against the defending Imperial fists. While some dispute the exact timing of this event, it is widely accepted that the concluding actions of the Siege of Cathonia occurred at the same moment the Emperor triumphed over his treacherous son Horus in personal combat. However, given the distance between Cathonia and the Sol system, any connection between these two events remains purely speculative. Cathonia, the first year of the 31st millennium. Cathonia was a world of solid rock, honeycombed with tunnels and subterranean cities, orbiting a slowly dying, fierce blue star in a lifeless system. Colonized in distant and forgotten years, Cathonia was a source of incredible wealth, mined from its depths on an industrial scale for millennia until only hollowed-out remnants remained. Humanity burrowed ever deeper into Chthonia's crust and built processing hives atop its surface, which eventually collapsed into the endless caverns sprawling beneath the planet's barren and poisoned surface. To these lightless realms of mining shafts and fallen hives was destined to become both a refuge and a prison for a fierce branch of humanity, which survived the Age of Strife. The relative proximity of Cthonia to Terra on a cosmic scale, which allowed intermittent communication between worlds even during the years of the Age of Strife, made this world one of the first to become part of the new Imperium. Since in those years there was no form of organized government on Cthonia, this occurred without the consent of its populace, which largely remained untouched and continued to live underground, while the young Imperium commenced harvesting the meagre remnants of Chthonia's mineral wealth. Interestingly, the first expedition of the 5th Legion to explore this world called for the extermination of the brutal native society, referring to it as a nest of serpents writhing in darkness which would be better destroyed. However, the Imperium needed their fangs, and in the depths of Cathonia it saw a new source of wealth, namely the savage skills of the local population. The scale of Chthonia's subterranean world and its unseen hordes turned out to be a far greater treasure than the Imperium had anticipated, for they not only proved to be an excellent reserve of recruits both for the Imperial army and the Legiones Astartes, but also sheltered one of the Primarchs, thought to be lost. Under the directive of Horus Lupercal, who received the title of Lord of the 16th Legion, the inhabitants of Cthonia were given the opportunity to serve as warriors within the ranks of the imperial armies or as labourers in the newly restored Manufactoria. Furthermore, the greatest of the re-established hives would be renamed the Lupercal Gate and serve as a bridge connecting the lightless underground world, where fierce warriors from among the locals trained, and the world on the surface, where outsiders struggled to restore even the slightest glimmer of Chthonia's former glory. After the outbreak of the Horus heresy, Dawn ordered the conquest of Cthonia and the subjugation of its native populace, seeing in this world a bastion of traitors on the doorstep of Terra. A small garrison left by Horus to protect his homeworld was scattered. The survivors vanished into the impassable depths of the underworld to continue their resistance, while the Imperial Fists contented themselves with occupying the surface and orbital infrastructure. The hive, the Lupercal Gate, was renamed the Gate of the Traitor, and monuments once erected in honor of the War Master of the Imperium were demolished and destroyed. All efforts to restore the desolated world ceased, and the occupying forces concentrated all their efforts on extracting any available resources to sustain the increasingly desperate combat in the Sol system and beyond. The Path of Grief, Cthonia in the years of the Horus heresy. The following timeline illustrates the main events of the Horus heresy, impacting Cthonia in various ways, in chronological order. The Horus heresy begins, the 5th year of the 31st millennium. Horus instigates a revolt amidst the ruins of Istvan III, purging his treacherous legion of those who remained faithful to the Emperor's oaths. The Dropsite Massacre, the 6th year of the 31st millennium. Rogel Dawn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists and Seneschal of Terra, dispatches a hastily assembled punitive fleet to Istvan in a bid to quell Horus's uprising. Unfortunately, the Loyalist forces are annihilated through betrayal during the infamous Dropsite Massacre on Istvan V. The First Siege of Cthonia, the 6th year of the 31st millennium. As an initial measure to safeguard the Segmentum Solar, a massive fleet comprising the Imperial Fists, Space Wolves, Loyalist Tagmata of the Mechanicum, numerous regiments of the Imperial Army, and a detachment of the Legio Custodes attack Cthonia, the birthplace of Horus. The garrison on the surface is quickly broken and forced to retreat into the underworld to wage a guerrilla campaign. Several key officers of the Sons of Horus are captured and taken to Terra for public execution, while an occupation regime is established on Cthonia itself. The Fall of Paramar, the 6th year of the 31st millennium. Horus's traitor legions conquer Paramar, forcing Dawn to redeploy significant forces to counter this strike at the heart of the Imperium. The Loyalist army on Cthonia is deprived of most of its strength, leaving only a small garrison of the Imperial Fists and Mechanicum, forces to contain the surviving Sons of Horus. The Ruin Storm, the 7th year of the 31st millennium. On the distant Calth, the Word-bearers summon the Ruin Storm, and the defenders of Cthonia find themselves momentarily cut off from the rest of the Segmentum Solar. The Imperial Fist garrison faces assault from the Word-bearers' host, While inductions of the Sons of Horus launch an attack from the depths, the 7th Legion manages to hold the defense at great cost. The occupation of Cthonia becomes increasingly perilous, but Dawn can allocate only a minimal additional number of troops, sending to support his sons a contingent of loyal legionaries of the Thousand Sons and their guardians from the Silent Sisterhood. The Bitter War, the 9th year of the 31st millennium. A contingent of grief-maddened Iron Hands arrives on Cathonia, seeking to continue their personal vendetta against the Word-bearers. Armed with forbidden weaponry, the Iron Hands reject all orders and requests to join the Garrison and venture into the underworld. Nothing more is heard of them, but for several months the traitors cease their raids on the surface. The Solar War, the 10th year of the 31st millennium. The strike forces of the traitors breach the perimeter of the solar system and sow chaos in the Segmentum Solar. As the ruin storm still hinders warp travel and communication for the Loyalist defenders, it is difficult for Rogel Dawn to find the forces to hold back these raids. Hydra's Poison. The 11th year of the 31st millennium. A squadron of ships bearing the heraldry of the Salamanders arrives at Cthonia, using outdated security codes to gain access to the orbital platform over the planet. These forces are soon revealed to be operatives of the Alpha Legion and are driven off, but not before the turncoats drop supplies and reinforcements for the Sons of Horus. The Death of Talon, the 12th year of the 31st millennium. Talon, a key Loyalist defense point to the galactic south of Terra, is completely ravaged by the treacherous onslaught. Now that Loyalist forces are shattered, the garrison at Cthonia holds little hope for further aid from Rogel Dawn or Terra. The Angel of Death's campaign, the 12th year of the 31st millennium. As the galaxy descends into chaos, the Lion and his Dark Angels unleash fury upon the southern fringes of the Imperium. As displaced troops and stragglers from both sides fall back before the Lion's wrath, several squads from the so-called Shattered Legions join the garrison at Cathonia. Breakthrough into the Segmentum Solar, the 13th year of the 31st millennium. Beta Garmon has fallen, and the traitors breach Rogel Dawn's cordon around Segmentum Solar. All surviving Loyalist forces retreat to the solar system, or if unable, remain and defend where they can. The Chthonian garrison is ordered to hold out until it is relieved, a message bearing Rogel Dawn's own hand. The Second Siege of Cathonia, the 13th year of the 31st millennium. A fleet of the Sons of Horus and support elements detach from Horus's massive armada and bypass the solar system to attack Cathonia. The outnumbered garrison of the Imperial Fists finds itself isolated with no retreat possible, relying only on the hope of the arrival of relief forces from Terra to break the siege. The Fall of Terra. The 14th year of the 31st millennium. The traitorous Warmaster Horus utterly crushes resistance within the solar system and prepares for the final assault on Terra itself. Now, Cthonia is left entirely alone, with no hope of rescue from beyond. Part 1. Shadows of the Future. Those who proclaim their victory before their enemy lies dead are fools. The struggle ends only after the final blow is struck. Angron the Red Angel, Primarch of the World Eaters. Over the years of the Horus heresy, Cathonia faced not one but two sieges. The first became a bloody prelude to the second, a grim reflection of the fate that awaited the planet in the final years of the Great Heresy. This initial siege, albeit brief and far less catastrophic than the final one, would lay the groundwork for what would become one of the most iconic final battles of the Horus heresy. Following the infamous Dropsite massacre, when the combined might of several loyal legions was cleaved by betrayal, Rogel Dawn activated plans to fortify the Segmentum Solar and the solar system. Given that a significant portion of his legion was still scattered in the aftermath of that battle, Dawn could only provide protection to a few key worlds, aiming to halt the traitors' advance long enough to rally other legions. Paramar, Beta Garmon, and Lorin Alpha would become the front lines of the civil war, fortress worlds intended to hold back the traitor advances. As he advanced towards Terra and the inevitable confrontation with the Emperor, Horus could not bypass these loyalist strongholds and leave them behind. Thus he was compelled to engage Dawn's forces on their held ground. In turn, Cthonia represented a dagger at Terra's back, a world rich in warriors, weapons and equipment, loyal to the treacherous Warmaster, and located close enough to the solar system for the attacking forces to land long before the fortress worlds of Segmentum Solar could send reinforcements. Such a threat could not be ignored, and thus Dawn, continuing to take measures to slow the Warmaster's advance, dispatched the troops he could muster to neutralize the threat from Cathonia and turn the danger the planet posed to his advantage. For if this world were left to its own devices, it would become a bastion of traitors in the very heart of Segmentum Solar. But if Dawn's legion could seize control of Cathonia, the planet would become a true arsenal for the 7th Legion, the primary source of both weapons of war and warriors for its new master. The First Siege. To this end, Dawn dispatched to Cathonia the 9th and 14th Battalions of the Imperial Fists, the 13th Great Company of the Space Wolves, several Terran cohorts of the Imperial Army, and even 3 brotherhoods of the Legio Custodes. The combat grouping was commanded by Lord Castellan Evandagarius, a warrior who once served with the Lunar Wolves during the glory days of the Great Crusade, and now a veteran fallen into disfavour with his lord Rogel Dawn. He was the perfect tool for this mission, for he understood his enemy as few others did, and desperately sought to regain Dawn's favour. In turn, only 2 orders stood guard over Cathonia. Both had arrived on the planet quite recently to replenish battle losses with fresh recruits, as well as an augmented company of the word-bearers. These limited forces could not hope to withstand the might of the Imperium, and this fact could not escape the military genius of the Warmaster, indicating that Horus clearly did not intend to fight to retain control over his homeworld. Lupercal committed everything to a full-scale attack against Terra itself from his new citadel in the distant galactic north, and Cathonia for him was a strategic bluff, a means to divert part of Dawn's forces, but nothing more. Perhaps it was the premonition of such a strategy, or perhaps sheer pragmatism in the face of overwhelming power that struck the traitors on Cathonia in the 6th year of the 31st millennium, for they scarcely attempted to resist the invasion fleet in open combat. Their starships departed the system even before the Imperial fleet appeared, while the stranded warriors of the treacherous legions on Cathonia chose not to resist the Loyalists' landing. Instead, they retreated to the spires of Hive Lupercal's Gate and Atlas Terminal, intending to organize a defense from these more fortified positions. Warriors of the 13th Great Company of the Space Wolves, deployed from landing capsules, became the vanguard of the Loyalist landing, and on the ashen plains before the majestic spires of Lupercal's Gate, the first blood was shed. The merciless wolves descended like an avalanche upon the isolated squads they encountered, bringing to bear every weapon at their disposal and giving the enemy not a single chance to rally or counterattack. Of those squads that faced the warriors of Fenris that day, none survived, and moreover, only a few of the remaining fragments of Cathonia's defenders were identifiable, for most had been hewn or torn beyond recognition. Having fought against the 1,000 Suns a year prior, the Thanes of the 13th Great Company had learned not to restrain themselves when their opponent proved to be the Legiones Astartes. While the wolves of Fenris drenched the soil of Cathonia with the blood of its former masters, the Imperial Fists attacked the central spire of Lupercal's Gate. As the Imperial armies surrounded the enormous structure, a phalanx of 7 Leviathan siege dreadnoughts obliterated the main gate, shattering the golden eye of Horus that adorned it. Although the contingent of Sons of Horus defending the gate put up stubborn resistance, they could only temporarily delay the colossal dreadnoughts. One of the formidable war machines was halted by a barrage from melter guns, another by a point-blank shot from a champion siege tank. The ferocious tactics of the Great Crusade met with the stubborn valour of the Legiones Astartes. But if such daring strikes crushed lesser foes, they proved far less effective against the Space Marines who had betrayed the Emperor. Nonetheless, despite all their defiance, the Sons of Horus could not withstand the enemy's numerical superiority. The Imperial fists pressed their attack, leaving behind nothing but corpses clad in sea-green armour. Following the warriors who cleared the gate, squads of Huskars and Varagir, clad in gold and storm sky colours, advanced under the command of Evander Garrus of the 456th Company. These select warriors strove to swiftly seize control of the celestial vault of the spire at the gates of Lupercal, where the black throne of Cthonia lay, the very place from which the traitor Warmaster once ruled the world that had elevated him. In an effort to capture this great trophy for his own Primarch, Garrus dispatched his finest fighters to assault the celestial vault, where several dozen Sons of Horus and servo-automatons obstructed further progress through a series of cunningly planned skirmishes. Yielding to the elite of two legions, the Sons of Horus utilized the Hive City itself for a struggle they already suspected would prove futile. Power junctions were set to explode at opportune moments, bulkhead doors were sealed shut, and in one instance an entire subsection of Upper Pylon number 19 was severed from the Hive superstructure by a series of controlled detonations to consign a squad of Huskars to a fiery death. For nearly 4 hours, the Sons of Horus held off Lord Castellan Garrus, disregarding their own losses and the damage inflicted upon the Hive's upper levels. The defence collapsed only after Garrus and Thane Colby of the Space Wolves stormed the Celestial Vault and struck down the leaders of the Sons of Horus. Far below, in the depths of the gates of Lupercal, the Imperial Fists, expecting to encounter similarly stubborn resistance from the proud Sons of Horus, met only scattered groups of defenders. It quickly became apparent to the loyalist field commanders that the traitors had no intention of defending the massive Hive City and instead sought to sabotage its key systems to render the Emperor's prize utterly worthless to the invading forces. Bereft of alternatives, the Imperial Fists committed to securing several key points within the Hive City. Dawn's Sons understood they could not completely thwart their enemies' schemes. Breach squads equipped with storm shields crushed the Sons of Horus saboteurs, attempting to overload the ancient reactors of the gates of Lupercal, but could not prevent the Sons of Horus from destroying the city's auger arrays and macro-weapon defense batteries. Pursued by the Imperial Fists Rangers and the Space Wolves Hunters, most surviving elements of the city's garrison retreated through the vast inner gates into the heart of the gates of Lupercal, disappearing into the unexplored depths of Chthonia's underworld, continuing to pose a threat to Chthonia's occupation forces despite their isolation. Bitter Trophy. Despite these aforementioned minor setbacks, Cathonia now belonged to Rogel Dawn. The enormous banner bearing the Eye of Horus, which once adorned the heights above the walls of the ancient hive at the gates of Lupercal, was torn down and burned. The city itself was renamed the Gates of the Betrayer and placed under Dawn's control in accordance with the Emperor's command. Cthonia was to be deprived of all its assets and treasures, directed to appease the hunger of the ongoing war. The minerals and ores that could be mined were sent to the forge world of Graia to feed the foundries of war, while the resilient inhabitants of Cthonia were to serve as a rough labour force, raw material for the factories of Lacrimata, or supplement the ranks of the Imperial Fists as inductees. Every single symbol of the treacherous Warmaster was to be destroyed and forgotten. His memory buried, and his legion was not merely to be defeated on the battlefields, but deprived of a future. For those who were to become the new generation of the Sons of Horus were to be taken and remade into true warriors of the Emperor, into the Imperial Fists. This monumental task was entrusted to Castellan Lord Garrus, upon whose shoulders not only fell the duties of keeping Cthonia under the control of the Primarch and the Emperor, but also the tasks of implementing the tenets of the Imperial Truth, to reshape the local culture to serve the Emperor. Despite the title Defender of Cthonia, few saw in Garrus's appointment anything other than another reprimand in the long service record of the captain, for his martial vanity in recent battles had led to unnecessary losses among the Huskars and Varagir Terminators. The Praetorian of Terra had placed a heavy burden on his son, which was in equal measure both a final opportunity to demonstrate his worth and a harsh punishment for failures. As tied by the new duty on Cathonia, Garrus was deprived of the opportunity to join the desperate war in defence of the Imperium, and the right to stand by his lord to face the impending storm together. When Garrus and his 456th Company took their new posts with the stoic discipline expected of the 7th Legion, the lion's share of other forces fighting on Cathonia in the name of the Emperor was transferred to other theatres of war. As the heart of the Imperium's need for warriors and material resources became critical, with the legions of Horus pressing across the hastily erected defensive lines of Dawn everywhere, garrison forces throughout the Segmentum Solar were disbanded to regroup at new defensive positions. For the same reason, the tithes from planets that remained loyal were increased. Coercive measures appeared risky and could raise the likelihood of rebellion, but this risk seemed justified in the face of the War Master's onslaught. On Cathonia, where Garrus now ruled from the old throne of Lupercal, the new demands of Terra led to the loyalist forces dwindling to little more than a reinforced company of Imperial fists and several cohorts of light infantry from nearby Necromunda. This was barely sufficient to hold back the sons of Horus, who lurked in the tunnels beneath Cathonia's surface. Their incessant raids proved that the threat was still near and hindered the re-education efforts of the proud populace of Lupercal's domain. These people would be driven from the underworld to populate the half-functioning halls of the Traitor's Gate and the extensive slums at the Hive's foot, leaving the dungeons as a haven for rebels, criminals, and the sons of Horus, where the Loyalists held no power in this labyrinth of tunnels. To bolster his dwindling garrison, Garrus initiated a swift recruitment, conversion, and ideological indoctrination of the most suitable recruits from among the warlike inhabitants of Cathonia to form new inductee companies, in order to fortify the defences and supply Lord Dawn with new forces for the raging Horus heresy. This process gave birth to a breed of space marines vastly different in character from the veterans of the Great Crusade. These were warriors raised and trained to fight other Astartes, a disposable weapon of war and nothing more, possessing neither the traditions of the Legion nor reverence for the Primarch who ordered their creation. They wore the colours of the Imperial fists with indifference, but Garrus made sure to keep the new troops from knowing the ancient traditions of their Chthonian ancestors, lest they fall into the heresy that engulfed the sons of Horus, for only rapid ideological indoctrination became the cement that bound their fortress of loyalty, and not the years of war that once welded together the first warriors of the 7th Legion. Many of the Chthonian-raised inductees would be transferred to other companies of the Imperial Fists operating beyond Cathonia. This slowed Garrus's efforts to strengthen the world's defences, yet fate's twists somewhat mitigated this circumstance. The conquered homeland of the Sons of Horus received an unexpected boon from the battles raging throughout the Imperium. Several detachments of the so-called Shattered Legions, those who suffered monstrous losses during the drop site massacre, attempted to use Cthonia as an operational base for raids against traitorous citadels in the galactic south of Terra. Furthermore, Garrus's warriors received a completely astonishing reinforcement in the form of a Thousand Sons detachment. The remnants of the Fifth Fellowship fleeing from Prospero after its destruction and seeking the Emperor's mercy. Initially they were sentenced to imprisonment in the dungeons beneath the palace, but with the onset of the heresy they were offered a chance at redemption. Garrus, who trusted these twice traitors as little as his Primarch, stationed them in Pharos Obscurus, an ancient dilapidated beacon on the edge of the toxic sea, and forced them to fight against the remnants of the Sons of Horus garrison in the underworld's depths. However, they would not be the last war orphans to find their way to Cathonia. As the tide of the conflict increasingly turned in favour of the traitors, each new defeat resulted in new souls replenishing the forces of Lord Castellan Garrus. After the fall of Talon, whose surface was forever marred by the wrath of traitorous forces, approximately 3 companies of the Imperial Fists would fight their way out of the system and forge a dangerous path to Cthonia, where they would await the next assault with fatalistic stoicism. In less than a year, Beta Garmon itself, the great fortress world fortified by Dawn to protect the borders of Segmentum Solar, would fall under the onslaught of the War Master, and the scattered loyalist forces would retreat back to new sanctuaries, both within the Segmentum and beyond its borders. Each tragedy brought to Garrison and his warriors tales of heroism and defiance that formed the basis of the legend of their great heresy, a legend written without them, for they remained trapped in their duty to hold back the traitors hiding in Chthonia's underground labyrinths. As the Horus heresy approached its final stages, and the War Master finally reached out to Terra, Cathonia continued to hold, filled with warriors gathered from the last bastions and endless battlefields, but experiencing only the faintest touch of brutal conflict. However, this monotonous lull was not destined to last long, and in the last months of the Horus heresy, war in all its terrifying fury finally arrived on Cathonia. The Cthonia garrison in the 13th year of the 31st millennium. This record is dedicated to those brave souls who fought to the last in the name of the Emperor and the defence of his Imperium. Though their sacrifice is often overshadowed by the horror that befell Terra, may it never be forgotten. Chthonia's High Command, Lord Castellan, Evander Garius, captain of the 456th Company of the Imperial Fists and commander of the forces assembled on Cathonia. Archenomus, Third Illuminus of the Graean Tech Conclave, and High Magos of the Mechanicum on Cathonia. Shadow Captain Saiban Netkal, the last captain of the Deliverers and representative of the Shattered Legion's forces on Cathonia. Magister Sul Contemp, leader of the remnants of the Fifth Fellowship of the Thousand Suns, who has taken the Oath of Penitence. Vigil Commandress Ambriel Malinex, mistress of the Onyx Hounds Detachment and Supreme Commander of the Silent Sisterhood's forces on Cathonia. Lord Marshal Sember Artriox, commander of the 14th Terran Cohort and senior officer of the Imperial Army on Cathonia. Legiones Astartes Imperial Fists, elements of the 5th, 18th, 19th and 456th Companies of the Imperial Fists, consisting of approximately 10,000 battle-ready legionnaires as well as about 5,000 inductees, raised from the Cathonia populace. Thousand Sons, remnants of the 5th Fellowship, consisting of around 3,000 battle-ready legionnaires who have taken the Oath of Penitence and are under the supervision of the Silent Sisterhood. Shattered Legions, several detachments composed predominantly of Raven Guard and Iron Hands, totaling approximately 1,500 battle-ready legionnaires in small companies with various commanders. It is reported that the infamous assassin Cade's Nex was part of these forces. Mechanicum, Tagmata Griffon, mixed forces including approximately 500 armoured vehicles and 150,000 infantry, mostly techno-thralls. Legio Titanicus, 18 Titans of Legio Astroman and 5 Titans of Legio Osidax, as well as combined infantry forces of the Techno Guards numbering around 6,000 warriors. Knight Houses, around 60 knights of various models, mostly from House Veroni. Imperial Army, around 1,500 armoured units and approximately 400,000 infantry from numerous detachments, including the 14th Terran Cohort Dragoon Guard, Talon Armoured Auxilia, 9th Jovian Cohort of the Rams, 3rd, 77th, and 142nd Necromundan Cohorts, 3 Jaguar Cohorts from the Olmec Legions, the 19th Tarascan Pathfinders, and Haranid Wardens, 3rd Shrine. Auxiliary Forces, Sisters of Silence, 1 complete squad of the Onyx Hounds, as well as individual elements of the Snow Leopards and the Silver Hawks. In total, about 2,500 fighters. Mercenary Chthonian militia, about 100,000 militiamen recruited and equipped on Cathonia after control of the world was wrested from the Sons of Horus. The retinue of the rogue trader, about 3,000 warriors including bodyguards and support squads of rogue trader Marcella Carilandan, whose fleet was detained in orbit of Cathonia. Invasion Fleet of the True Sons. Presented here is a list of those who have forsaken their oaths of allegiance to the Imperium, bringing death and destruction to the Emperor's domains. While they have not tainted Terra itself with their betrayal, they are no less stained by the vile deeds of their master. High Command of the Traitorous Host, Acting Captain Varen Asher-Haddon, first raider and leader of the True Sons, commanded the 23rd Company of the Sons of Horus and the invasion fleet of the traitors with the highest authority granted to him by Horus Lupercal himself. Captain Zedek Mordecai, officer of the Order of the Flayed Hand of the Word Bearers Legion, commanding a separate contingent of warriors under the order of Dark Apostle Erebus. Archmagos Dracovac, the notorious Archmagos of Cyclothratha, joined the fleet of his own will and desire without the command of the War Master or any other official authority of the traitors. Archmagos Ferroc Tran, foremost among the Magos of Vos attached to the fleet. The Lords of the Forge World Vos lost their rights to the riches of Cthonia after loyalist forces took control of it and sought to reclaim what once belonged to them. Legiones Astartes, Sons of Horus, fragments of the 5th, 19th, 20th, 23rd, 34th and 68th Companies, all units veterans of the Great Crusade. In total, about 20,000 infantry and 400 combat vehicles. Word-bearers, elements of the Order of the Flayed Hand, 4,000 Space Marines, and about 8,000 cultists. Alpha Legion, numerous squads with deliberately confusing heraldry. According to estimates, their numbers comprised less than 2,000 fighters, with contradictory reports also noting the presence of a warrior known only as Incursus. Mechanicum, Tagmata Cyclothratha, approximately 1,000 armoured vehicles including 3 Ordinatus, around 5,000 support infantry. Tagmata Vos, primarily battle automata of various classes, around 10,000 units. Legio Titanicus, 12 Titans of Legio Andrastus, 21 Titans of Legio Ulricon, and 8 Titans of Legio Magna, including 1 fully combat-capable Warlord Titan. Knight Houses, around 80 knights of various patterns, mostly from House Atrax. Renegade army units and militias. Reports indicate the presence of over 800,000 infantry and 500 armoured vehicles within numerous formations, including the 139th, 143rd, 145th, and 132nd cohorts of Chthonian head-takers, the 6th cohort of Idran stalkers, 4 regiments of the Dark Cull, as well as the catechists of the New Dawn.